He slammed the door in her face, ashamed of her rickety shoes and wrinkled clothes. But he had no idea who she really was, or what she had already done for him. It was just past 8 a.m. when Margaret climbed the old steps to her son's front porch. Her coat was thin for the cold, and her hands trembled, not from age, but from nerves. She hadn't seen David in months. Not since his wedding, where she was seated near the back, next to the coat rack, while his new wife, Kayla, smiled stiffly and whispered about keeping things classy. She rang the bell and waited, clutching a small tin in her hand. Cookies, his favorite, chocolate chip with sea salt, just like when he was a boy and scraped his knees every week. The door opened. David stood there in a suit. He looked older than she remembered. Sharper. Cold. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Margaret gave a soft smile. "I was in the area. Thought I'd bring you something sweet." He glanced down at the tin like it was poisoned. "You can't just show up here. Kayla has clients coming over." "I won't stay," she said gently. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." David sighed and looked back into the house. Then he stepped outside, pulling the door nearly shut behind him. "Mom, you can't keep doing this." She blinked. "Doing what?" "Showing up like we're close. Things are different now." Her voice wavered. "I raised you alone, David. I thought we were family." "That was years ago," he snapped, voice low. "You chose to live like that. No savings, no planning. I have a life now. People expect things. Appearances matter." Margaret stood still, her heart cracking in places that had already been broken too many times. "I don't care what people think. I just care about you." "Well, maybe you shouldn't," he muttered. Then, without another word, he opened the door, stepped back inside, and shut it. The click of the lock echoed louder than any scream. Margaret stood there a moment longer, her hands trembling around the tin. Then she set it down on the step and walked slowly back toward the street. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because she already knew. The world had just shifted, and not in the way David expected. Margaret didn't cry as she walked to the bus stop. Her face stayed calm, but her heart felt like a sinking stone. She sat quietly on the cold bench, pulling her scarf tighter as cars rushed past. No one noticed the old woman waiting in silence. And that's how it had always been. Years of being invisible. Even to her own son. But what David didn't know was that his mother had a secret, one she had carried for over 30 years. Long ago, Margaret had worked as a cleaner in a real estate office. Most days she scrubbed floors while men in suits talked loudly over coffee. But she had listened, quietly, carefully. Names, trends, neighborhoods that were about to boom. So she bought a house. Then another. And another. Small, beat-up places no one wanted. She fixed them up slowly, mostly with her own hands. Sometimes renting, sometimes selling, always reinvesting. She never told David. Not when he was a teenager demanding new sneakers. Not when he went off to college on a scholarship and told his friends she was just a nurse. She didn't want to embarrass him. She didn't want to get in the way. By the time she was 65, she owned 6 properties. By 70, 10. All paid off, all in cash, and all under a different name, a name no one connected to her son. She kept living simple. Same apartment, same grocery store. She clipped coupons, donated quietly, never asked for thanks. And now, at 80, with arthritis in her hands and a lockbox full of deeds, she had come to visit her only child. Not for money, not even for help, but just for love. And he had turned her away like a nuisance. That evening, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a manila envelope. Inside it were documents, all her properties, all her plans, For years, her will had listed David as her sole heir. But tonight, under the hum of the kitchen light and the quiet sound of rain outside, she picked up a pen and crossed out his name. She replaced it with someone else's. Someone who had loved her like family when he hadn't. A young waitress named Grace who lived in her building. The one who always offered to carry her groceries, who brought her soup when she was sick, who never once asked what Margaret had in the bank. Margaret smiled softly as she signed the paper. David wanted to look rich, but he had no idea how poor he really was. A week later, David got a call from Margaret's lawyer, but not because she had passed away. She was perfectly fine. In fact, she was having tea on her balcony, watching birds gather on the railing while Grace laughed from the kitchen, trying to make her pancakes without burning them. The lawyer's tone was calm, professional. "Mr. Hunt, your mother requested I notify you of an update to her estate." David frowned. "What estate?" "She barely has anything." There was a pause. "Actually, sir, your mother's net worth is currently just over $7.4 million. David sat up. "Excuse me?" "She owns 11 rental properties, all mortgage-free, and holds a considerable amount in liquid savings and long-term investments." His mouth fell open. "Are you sure you have the right person? Margaret Hunt? My mother lives in a studio apartment and wears shoes with duct tape on them." "Yes," the lawyer said calmly. "She chose to live modestly. She also chose to remove you from her will." David stood in stunned silence, as if the room had shrunk around him. "She... What? Why?" The lawyer sighed. "You'd have to ask her, but the documents are signed. The new beneficiary is someone named Grace Delaney." He hung up, heart pounding. That evening, David showed up at Margaret's door again, this time holding flowers and wearing his fake, warm smile. But Margaret didn't answer right away. She let him stand in the cold for a while, just like she had stood outside his house, holding cookies he never touched. Finally, the door opened. "Hi, Mom," he said gently. She looked at him without blinking. "I don't have time for performance tonight." "Look, I didn't know. About the money, the houses. I wasn't asking for anything, David," she interrupted softly. "Not money. Not help. Just a bit of your heart. But you made it clear there wasn't any room for me in it." "I made a mistake," he said quickly. "I wasn't thinking." "No," she said, still calm. "You were thinking very clearly, about status, about appearances, not about love." He opened his mouth to speak, but she stopped him. "I'm not changing the will." He looked down, face flushed. She stepped forward, her voice low. "You're still my son. I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean handing over pieces of my soul to someone who only sees my worth in dollars." Grace appeared behind her, gently placing a hand on Margaret's shoulder. The two women looked peaceful together. Real, honest. David took one look, then stepped back. He didn't argue. He knew it was too late. As the door slowly closed, Margaret gave him one last look. It wasn't angry. It was simply done. For the first time, David realized that you don't inherit love with a signature. You earn it, moment by moment, or you lose it forever. David sat in his car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. The flowers lay beside him, untouched. They looked perfect, but fake. Just like the life he had built, chasing status and recognition. Inside, Margaret sat with Grace at the small kitchen table. Grace was still laughing about the way her pancakes came out looking like clouds. "I don't know how you do it," she said, watching Margaret flip hers perfectly. "You've got magic hands." Margaret smiled warmly. "It's just patience, and a lot of burned ones over the years." They ate in peace, the kind of peace that can't be bought. Grace didn't know every detail of Margaret's life yet, but she didn't need to. She was present, she cared, and she never once asked about money. Later that week, Margaret called her lawyer again. "I want Grace to inherit everything," she said firmly, "but I don't want her to know yet. I want her to love me for who I am, not what I have." "She already does," the lawyer said kindly, "but I'll make sure everything's in place." As the months passed, Margaret's health began to decline, but Grace never left her side. She took her to appointments, read to her when her eyes got tired, and even brought her favorite pie from a diner downtown every Sunday. And when the day finally came that Margaret passed peacefully in her sleep, Grace found a letter waiting for her on the table. It was handwritten, tied with a ribbon. "Dear Grace, you gave me more in 1 year than my own son gave me in 20. Love, dignity, time. I didn't have a daughter, but I had you. So now I leave you what I built. Not just the homes, but the hope behind them. Use it well, live kindly, and never forget your worth isn't measured in things. It's measured in heart." Love, Margaret Grace wept as she read it, but she smiled through her tears. Across town, David sat in his luxury condo, staring at the news article that had gone viral. "Young woman inherits $7 million from elderly neighbor. Says love is the only thing that made her rich." His name wasn't mentioned, not even once. And that was the final lesson Margaret left him. The world remembers kindness. It forgets the selfish.